I used to believe that family was the one thing in life you could never truly lose. That no matter how hard things got, how many arguments flared up or misunderstandings piled on top of each other, the people who shared your blood would always find their way back to you. My name is Arya, and I spent the better part of my 20s proving that belief with every dollar I earned, every hour I gave, every piece of myself I handed over without being asked. I learned the hard way that some families don't come back to you. Some families use the door you left open and walk out through it, and then have the nerve to blame you for the draft. I was 24 when my parents first brought up the idea of opening a restaurant. My mother had always been the kind of cook who made strangers stop mid-conversation and ask what was on the stove. My father had the personality for it, warm, loud in the best way, the kind of man who could make anyone feel like a regular on their first visit. They had been talking about it for years, the way some people talk about winning the lottery. A little dream they kept folded in the back of their minds, never quite real enough to touch. Then my father got laid off. He was 53 years old and had just spent 20 years at a manufacturing plant that decided a spreadsheet was cheaper than he was. My mother's part-time work at a dental office wasn't enough to cover everything. They weren't in crisis, but they were close enough to see it from where they were standing. That's when the restaurant idea stopped being a dream and started being a plan. I was 25 by then, working as a financial analyst at a firm downtown. I wasn't rich, but I was careful. I had built up savings slowly, the kind of savings you accumulate by saying no to things you actually want and yes to things that are practical. I drove a car that was 7 years old and lived in an apartment with one window that faced a brick wall. I didn't care. I had a plan for myself to a quiet, steady future. I had been building one carefully made decision at a time. When my parents sat me down and told me what they were thinking, I listened to the whole thing before I said a word. They had found a location, a corner space in a part of town that was starting to attract foot traffic, the kind of neighborhood that was just on the edge of becoming something. The rent was manageable. The concept was clear. My mother's recipes, my father's energy. All they needed was startup capital and someone to help them navigate the paperwork. Because neither of them had ever dealt with a business loan before. I could have just given them money. That would have been the simple thing. But I knew how loans worked, and I knew that without the right structure, a small business could fall apart, not because the food was bad or the customers stopped coming, but because the finances were set up wrong from the beginning. So I didn't just write a check. I sat down with them for 3 weekends in a row and built the whole thing from scratch. I helped them form an LLC. I drafted the operating agreement. I co-signed the SBA loan with them because their credit history alone wasn't enough to qualify for the amount they needed, and because having my financial profile attached to the application was the difference between approval and rejection. When we filed the paperwork, we divided the ownership the way I suggested: 60% to me as the primary financial guarantor, 40% split between my parents. My mother hesitated when she saw the numbers. I told her it was just for the bank, just the way these things had to be structured to protect everyone legally. She nodded and signed. My father shook my hand and told me I was the smartest person he had ever known. My brother had been around for all of this. He was 2 years younger than me. The kind of person who always showed up after the work was done and somehow still got credit for the effort. He had a habit of making himself the center of a room without contributing anything to the room itself. Our parents adored him in the particular way. Some parents adore the child, who needs them more with a softness that had no edges, no conditions, no ability to see clearly. He could do very little wrong in their eyes, and what little wrong he did do had a way of becoming someone else's fault by the time the story finished traveling. He started working at the restaurant once it opened. Not in any official capacity at first, just helping out, which quickly became being paid in cash off the books, which quickly became having opinions about how things should be run that my parents took seriously in ways they didn't take mine. I was the one who set up the bookkeeping system. I was the one who reviewed the quarterly numbers and told them when costs were creeping too high. I came by on weekends sometimes, not to check up on anyone, just because I loved seeing the place full of people eating food my mother had made. For the first year, it was good. Not perfect, but good. The restaurant found its footing. The reviews were warm. There was a table by the window that was always occupied, which my father took as a personal point of pride. We were figuring it out together. Or at least, that's what I thought. The cracks started showing in the second year. My brother began making decisions without telling me. Vendor changes, a new hire, a menu expansion that hadn't been budgeted for. When I brought it up, he brushed it off the way he brushed everything off, with charm and a vague promise to loop me in next time. My parents backed him up every time, gently, the way you back up someone you can't bear to disappoint. I started feeling like I was standing outside a circle that had been drawn while I wasn't looking. I told myself it was fine. I told myself families work through things like this. I kept showing up, kept doing the books, kept making sure the loan payments were going out on time because my name was attached to that debt just as much as theirs was. And I was not going to let my credit rating take the hit for someone else's carelessness. Then my brother approached me about expanding. He had found a second location, a bigger space in a better part of town. He wanted to grow the brand, scale up, bring in investors. He laid it out over dinner one night with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no by anyone whose opinion he cared about. He needed my signature again. He needed me to co-sign a second loan, larger than the first. And he needed me to restructure the LLC to add him as a partner with a formal ownership stake. I told him I needed time to review everything. I took the paperwork home and went through it carefully. The numbers didn't make sense. The second location's projected costs were underestimated. The revenue projections were optimistic to the point of being fictional, and the terms of the new loan would have put real pressure on the original business if the expansion underperformed. I came back to him with my concerns laid out clearly, with data, with alternative suggestions. I was not saying no. I was saying not like this. He didn't hear any of it. What he heard was that I was standing in his way. I don't know exactly what was said in the conversations I wasn't part of, the ones happening in my parents' kitchen while I was at work, the ones in the car or over the phone after I had gone home for the night. I only know the result. It was a Thursday evening when the message came through. I was in the middle of making dinner, something simple, pasta, and whatever vegetables I had left at the end of the week. My phone buzzed on the counter and I glanced at it without thinking. It was a group text. My parents and my brother. I read it standing at the stove with the burner still on. We've been talking, and we've decided that we don't need your involvement in the business anymore. You've made it clear you're not supportive of this family's future. Your brother is the one actually building something here. We're moving forward without you. Don't call us. We'll have someone reach out about the paperwork. I read it twice. Then a third time. The pasta water was boiling behind me, and I didn't move. Don't call us. Not a conversation, not a meeting, not even the decency of a phone call. A group text, written in my mother's voice, but feeling like something my brother had drafted and put in front of her. Everything I had done, the loan, the LLC, the weekends of paperwork, the years of bookkeeping. The credit score I had put on the line reduced to an inconvenience that needed to be removed. I turned off the stove. I set my phone face down on the counter, and I stood there in my kitchen, in the quiet, for a long time. I didn't cry. I had expected to cry, but the feeling that moved through me wasn't grief. It was something colder and clearer than that. It was the feeling of finally understanding something you had been refusing to see for a very long time. I picked my phone back up and typed 4 words. Understood. I'll be in touch. That was all. No explanation, no defense, no paragraph about everything I had sacrificed. I hit send, put the phone in my bag, and went to bed earlier than I had in years. I slept better than I expected. The next morning I woke up with a calm I hadn't felt in months. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the LLC operating agreement that I had drafted myself, the one I knew better than anyone else in that family because I had written every clause of it. I had been careful when I wrote it. Not because I had ever imagined using it this way, but because I had always believed in building things correctly from the start. There was a provision in the agreement one I had included specifically to protect the business in case of a major dispute between members that gave any member holding more than 50% ownership the right to call for a formal valuation and buyout process. If the operating relationship became untenable, it was a standard clause. It was also the kind of clause that most people sign without reading because they trust the person who wrote the document and never imagine they'll need it. I held 60%. I also went back and looked at the SBA loan documents. My name was listed as the primary guarantor. Without my continued consent and cooperation, any attempt to refinance, restructure, or apply for additional financing would require my written approval. The second loan my brother wanted, the one for the expansion, could not move forward without my signature. I called a business attorney I had worked with briefly a few years earlier. Her name was Claire, and she had the particular quality I needed that morning, which was the ability to be completely unsentimental about other people's problems. I explained the situation. She asked a few questions. Then she said, quietly and simply, "Here's what you can do." She began drafting the formal notice. I had two options, she explained. I could initiate the buyout process, which would require my parents and brother to purchase my 60% stake at fair market value, a number they almost certainly could not afford without financing, which they could not get without me. Or I could file notice with the SBA that the operating structure of the LLC had materially changed and that I was formally requesting a review of my guarantee obligations given the breakdown in the business relationship. Both paths led to the same place. The expansion loan was dead, and without my cooperation, the business, as they had been running it, was on very unstable ground. I did not feel triumphant sitting in Claire's office. I want to be clear about that. I felt tired, and I felt honest for the first time in a long time, like I was finally seeing the shape of something that had always been there. Claire looked at me over her reading glasses. "Do you want to warn them first?" I thought about the group text. "Don't call us." "No," I said. "Let whoever they send reach out to me. Let them find out the way I found out without warning, without the chance to prepare." She nodded and kept writing. 48 hours later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from a man who identified himself as an attorney representing my parents and brother regarding the family business. His voice had the particular quality of someone who has just received information they were not expecting and is trying very hard to sound in control of the situation. He said they had been made aware of the notice I had filed. He said this was a serious matter. He said we needed to talk immediately. I listened to the voicemail twice, then called Claire and let her handle it. What she told me, later calmly, professionally, without any visible pleasure, though I thought I detected the faintest trace of satisfaction in her voice, was that the attorney had not been briefed on the full picture before he made the call. My brother and parents had told him that I had simply decided to create problems out of spite. They had not mentioned, apparently, that I held 60% of the LLC. They had not mentioned the clause about the buyout process. They had not mentioned that my name was the one on the primary guarantee. He had to pause the call twice while he reviewed documents he was clearly reading for the first time. I did not take any of the calls myself for the first few days. I let Claire manage everything, the way you let a professional manage something you've decided to handle correctly instead of emotionally. My brother called me 3 times. My father called twice. My mother texted a short message that said, "Only please call me, Aria." I read it and put the phone back in my pocket. On the 4th day, they came to my apartment. I heard the knock, and I knew before I opened the door. My mother was in front, her face doing something complicated that landed somewhere between guilt and desperation. My father stood slightly behind her, the way he stood when he didn't know what role he was supposed to be playing. My brother was there too, hanging back, the big energy he usually carried completely gone. My mother started talking before the door was fully open. "Aria, please, we made a mistake. We didn't understand what we were doing. We were upset, and your brother," she stopped herself, and I watched her decide not to finish that sentence. "We just need you to talk to us. Please." I looked at all 3 of them standing in my hallway, and I felt something settle inside me the way a heavy object settles when you finally put it down after carrying it too long. I said, very quietly, "Do you remember what your text said?" My mother looked at the floor. I said it again. Not to be cruel, but because I needed it to be real and not something that could be softened by time or reframing. "Don't call us." "That's what you said. You told me not to call. You told me I wasn't supportive of this family's future. You told me my brother was the one actually building something. You sent me a group text. Not a conversation. A text. After everything." My father opened his mouth, and I held up my hand. "I'm not angry," I told them. That's the part I need you to understand. I'm not standing here wanting you to suffer. I'm standing here because I have spent years being the person who held things together for this family quietly, in the background, without anyone asking, and the moment I said no to something, you treated me like an obstacle to be removed. And now you're here because the obstacle turned out to be a load-bearing wall. My brother looked up at that and I met his eyes. I'm not going to reverse the process, I said. That's not what this is. But I am going to be honest with all of you in a way that I should have been a long time ago. The business, the way it's currently structured, cannot continue without my involvement, and my involvement is no longer something you're entitled to. If you want to keep the restaurant, Claire will walk you through what a fair buyout looks like. If you can't buy me out, we'll discuss dissolution. Those are the options. My mother's eyes filled, and I felt a pull in my chest that I had to breathe through slowly. I love you, I said. I genuinely do. But love is not the same as being available for whatever you need whenever you need it, and then disposed of the moment someone more convenient comes along. I needed you to see that, and I'm sorry it took something this painful for any of us to get there. I closed the door, not in anger, in the quiet recognition that some endings are also beginnings, and that the two things can happen at the same moment in the same doorway. In the weeks that followed, Claire negotiated on my behalf. My parents did not have the capital to buy me out at fair market value, which was what I had expected. My brother applied for a personal loan to try to cover part of it and was declined, which was also what I had expected. What I had not entirely expected was that in the process of going through the formal valuation, Claire uncovered that my brother had been running some personal expenses through the business account for almost 8 months: car payments, a gym membership, a few charges from a home improvement store for work done on his apartment. Not enormous amounts, but enough. I could have pursued it further. Claire gave me that option plainly and without pressure either way. I thought about it for 2 days. Then I told her to document everything clearly for the record, but that I would not be filing a separate legal claim. What I wanted was resolution, not more years of fighting. I wanted to close the door cleanly and completely, not leave it hanging open with litigation, keeping me tied to people who had shown me exactly who they were. The restaurant was eventually sold. It went to a couple who had been looking for a turnover location for a concept they had been developing. They paid a fair price. The proceeds were divided according to the LLC structure, 60% to me, 40% to my parents. With my share, I did 2 things. The first was practical. I put most of it into a down payment on a small commercial property of my own, something I had been researching quietly for months, a space that I had a clear, concrete plan for, no co-signers needed, no family meetings required. The second thing I did was something I hadn't planned, but that felt exactly right when I thought of it. There was a nonprofit in my city that provided business development support to women who were trying to rebuild financial independence after leaving difficult situations, a combination of mentorship, seed funding, and the kind of practical paperwork guidance that most people don't know how to access. I had read about them a couple of years earlier and saved the article without knowing why. I made a significant donation. Not because I wanted to announce it to anyone, but because I had spent years being someone who helped people build things, and I wanted that to mean something beyond my own family's ledger. My mother called me once, about 2 months later. She didn't say much. She asked how I was doing, and I told her I was well. She said she was sorry, in the specific way that people are sorry when they have had time to see clearly and don't know how to undo what they've done. I told her I heard her. I did not tell her everything was fine, because it wasn't yet, and I wasn't willing to offer comfort that wasn't true just to make the silence less uncomfortable. We didn't talk long. When we hung up, I sat with the feeling for a while. It wasn't satisfaction. Not exactly. It wasn't peace yet either. It was something between the two, the beginning of something quieter, something that was mine. My brother never called. I hadn't expected him to. He was the kind of person who needed the last word, and the only way to give him that, finally, was to have no words left to say. I think about the version of myself who signed those LLC documents at 25, sitting at my parents' kitchen table with a pen in my hand and a plan in my head and a genuine, uncomplicated belief that the people in that room would always be worth it. I don't regret her. She was doing the best she knew how, with what she understood at the time. I don't wish she had been harder or colder or more suspicious of the people who told her she was their angel. But I'm glad she grew into me. There's a particular kind of strength that comes from finally understanding the difference between being generous and being used, between showing up for people and being expected to show up regardless of how they treat you, between loving your family and losing yourself inside that love until there's nothing left that belongs only to you. I'm not who I was at 25, standing at someone else's kitchen table signing my name onto their dream. I have my own table now, and the dream sitting on it has only my name on it. That's enough. More than enough. It's everything.